Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the third lecture with monopoly, and this is how we're going to fix the inefficiencies that we addressed in the previous lecture. So this is a whole lot of words, right? What I want you to kind of focus on are the bold parts of these. There's really four options that we have with natural monopolies, and then there's basically the same four options with artificial monopolies. We're going to do a price ceiling. We're going to allow them to do this thing called price discriminating, or we're going to break them up, or that is to say government ownership. So there's kind of two choices here. Artificial monopolies, we would typically break them up, and our natural monopoly, typically you would have government ownership. But before we get that far, before we actually use the kind of tools of government to really intervene in the market, let's think about some other options that we might have. So I'm going to talk about all of these options once we've got actually the graphs drawn here. So we'll first start with a graph of a natural monopoly, right? Price and quantity. First, we're going to draw demand and marginal revenue. And a natural monopoly is going to have a downward sloping marginal cost. And if it's earning a profit, it's going to have an ATC that's pretty close to that MC line. The first thing we're going to do is identify the quantity that the firm produces, and then go up to the demand curve and find the price that they're actually charging. Now we can, if we want to, we can kind of visualize that the profit rectangle would come down right there and over, right? So we would have some profit with this natural monopoly, and that's actually how it tells us to draw this. But what we want to do is actually use this graph to identify different points where actually they might end up being regulated to. So the first choice is to think about the price ceiling at a break-even price. That's kind of, I'm going to read from the left, assuming that you have these here. The price ceiling at a break-even price would be where demand equals average total cost. And that occurs right here. So this would be our, I'm going to put a little arrow, break even. Now, I'm not going to put a dashed line all the way. Actually, maybe I should just go ahead and do that right here. Here, price ceiling 1. And that price ceiling 1 refers to option number 1, price ceiling at your break-even price. If we do that, it actually takes this marginal revenue curve and flips it on its side and says, now you're going to produce all of these kind of units at this level of marginal revenue. And it causes them basically to produce as many units as they can at that level. And at that point, if they're producing here at this quantity, right, this is our quantity with this price ceiling 1, then we actually are what we call breaking even. Now, we're trying here to basically push the quantity that the firm is producing to the right, because we know that the optimal quantity is where price equals marginal cost. So if we ended up pushing the price down to PC1, we eliminate a lot of this area of deadweight loss. This area right in here would be part of the deadweight loss if we didn't have that price ceiling. And if we push the price down to PC1, then actually this deadweight loss goes away. So it actually disappears. We're still left with the deadweight loss that's right here. So by moving to a break-even level of price ceiling, you're forcing the monopolist to actually produce a few more units and lowering the price. You're not fully dealing with the problem of deadweight loss, but it's a good maybe middle ground. The second choice that we have is to use a price ceiling at the socially optimal price. This is sometimes called marginal cost pricing. And we see here this optimal level where price equals marginal cost, we're going to put QC2. That's like our second price ceiling option. And so if our second price ceiling option was here, PC2, if we set a price ceiling at PC2 at the optimal level, then actually this firm is going to be losing money. Notice that the ATC is actually above that price PC2. And so in this case, if we were to force this monopolist to produce PC2, that will eliminate all of the deadweight loss. All the deadweight loss goes away. And this whole area, huge area above PC2, all the way up the demand curve, becomes part of the consumer surplus. So consumers feel really great. It's actually the way that we maximize the total amount of surplus in this market. But the downside is that at this price, the ATC is up here. And we can see right here, if we say quantity P is less than ATC, so the firm loses money. And it requires subsidies, which are typically not very popular. So again, we could actually even envision what that area would look like. It would be kind of a rectangle right in there, all the way over from that ATC. Now, again, no deadweight loss, but the company is losing money, so we would have to subsidize them. And a lot of people feel icky about the notion of subsidizing a monopoly. Now, a third option is to allow price discrimination. And I'm going to verbally explain price discrimination here, and we're going to look at it in a practice video. But in essence, it's the idea of the firm charging each customer different prices, exactly what they're willing and able to pay. And so the marginal revenue curve shifts up and becomes part of the demand curve again. The price and the marginal revenue go back to being actually the same value. And if we were to kind of have that, where this kind of marginal revenue curve was where demand is, marginal revenue and marginal cost would equal each other at that optimal level. So it would achieve the goal of eliminating deadweight loss, right? We would cause us to produce the socially optimal, not deadweight loss, if they were allowed to charge different customers different prices. Because now, again, marginal revenue becomes partly just the price. It says if you're willing to pay 100, you pay 100. If you're willing to pay 90, you pay 90. The downside of that is that that process eliminates all the consumer surplus. Literally all of the surplus in the entire market, if we were to price discriminate and have the MR curve be over here, all of the surplus would be producer surplus. So consumers often feel like they're kind of getting ripped off in those types of markets. And it allows the firm to earn very high economic profits. Again, a less than popular, maybe political solution, but it does deal with the problem of deadweight loss. The fourth and final option in terms of dealing with natural monopolies is government ownership. And basically, in that type of a market, they would just say, well, we're going to produce the socially optimal quantity, QC2. We're going to produce and price it PC2. And governments don't really care if they're a private company that they've bought out, if they're losing money. They just basically subsidize it with tax pressure, with tax monies. The downside of that is that very often publicly owned monopolies have higher costs. And so you have kind of the double whammy of the firm's going to be continually losing money just because they've already chosen to price so low at this optimal level that it's below the average cost of a unit. But at the same time, it means that we're going to have to subsidize them as taxpayers. So there are some cases where people feel really uncomfortable with that. People always criticize, for example, the United States Postal Service. They'll say, oh my gosh, they lose money all the time. Well, yeah, by design. They're a monopoly that we've regulated them so that the prices are so low to mail a letter, right? Think about that, how crazy cheap it is to mail a letter from one end of the country all the way to Alaska or Hawaii. They will physically transport it for you for less than $1. It's amazing that they even do that. That's because they're losing money on those letters. They're producing the socially optimal quantity of letters, but they're losing money. Amtrak is another example of that. It's very common with actually government-owned natural monopolies or any types of government-owned monopolies that they lose money and require subsidies, which again, less than popular. So we have four options. Price ceiling at a break even that doesn't fully deal with the problem of deadweight loss. It leaves us with this little bit here. We could do a price ceiling at the optimal, but then we have to subsidize it because you've got this economic losses that are happening. You could allow them to price discriminate, which causes the firm to produce the socially optimal quantity, but then consumers feel like they're getting ripped off. And then last, you could actually have the government buy them up, but then there's higher costs and they're still losing money, and then people feel uncomfortable with that. Now, let's take a look at what we would do with artificial monopolies. So we're going to first draw the artificial monopoly with our profit. So we're going to start with demand and then come down to marginal revenue. And now we have an upward sloping marginal cost curve. And at this point, we're going to identify the quantity where the firm's going to produce and the price way up here on the demand curve. It's always a good habit to just practice drawing them in the same pattern every time. And we know this firm's earning a profit, so I'm going to come down here, put my ATC, and come back up again. ATC come back down. Now, we could kind of, again, we can envision the profit rectangle would go from here to this point and over, because again, we're going from price to ATC. We're not really messing with that in this particular video. Now, in this video, we have deadweight loss, right? We have that deadweight loss that's right there, and we would want to see how we could solve that. Well, one is we could use a price ceiling at our break-even point. That's our first choice. The problem with actually that is that it's actually not at our optimal point. This is our optimal, and that's our break-even. Break-even. And again, you can tell where these are because the price equals the ATC at that one, at the break-even point, and the optimal is the price equals the marginal cost. And in fact, you could see that if we were to go across right there, if we were to go across right there, if we were to push the price ceiling down to the break-even level, that's actually a price ceiling that's lower than the price for socially optimal that I'm going to label as PC2 to kind of keep these corresponding. And in fact, if you just do them at PC2, then there's no need to subsidize. The firm actually still earns an economic profit. So you can see if they're producing at PC2 at this quantity, if you go down just a little bit, I'm going to zoom in just a shade so you can see this. I know it's a little bit hard. It doesn't want to do, oh, I have to push over here. Duh. There. So if we actually kind of see, there would be just a tiny little bit of profit, and we would slide all the way over if we are actually producing at that quantity because the ATC is below it. So there's really no reason why we would want to actually produce and force them to produce the break-even amount. We could actually allow them to be at the socially optimal quantity and price, PC2, and then again, we would have like a quantity here that's optimal, and then here we would have like a quantity that's the break-even quantity. But the reason why we wouldn't necessarily want to go all the way over to this break-even and all the way down to this break-even price is actually because we don't have to. We could achieve the socially optimal without doing that. We'd eliminate the deadweight loss if we just price at PC2, which again corresponds to here, and they still earn economic profit. Now, as with the natural monopoly, I'm going to zoom back out just a bit here. As with the natural monopoly, we could let them price discriminate, and that would shift that marginal revenue up to being part of demand. That would eliminate all the deadweight loss, but it still has the same problems that we just talked about. And the last choice that we could have, typically governments don't take over industries that have artificial monopolies, but they could break them up or prevent their formation by using what's called antitrust legislation. The last thing on this page is actually to understand that we wouldn't want to use taxes. Taxes actually shift the supply curve upward by the amount of the tax, which actually worsens the problem. Just think about what would happen with a normal tax. If you had any form of a tax, let's just draw a little picture down at the bottom just to remind ourselves, price and quantity. If we have a tax in any kind of a perfectly competitive market, it just causes the supply curve to shift up, which means our prices go up and our quantity goes down. So any amount of a tax is actually going to make this problem worse. It's going to make the price go up and the quantity get even smaller, so we wouldn't want to use a per unit tax. If we used a lump sum tax, it doesn't change the quantity at all, so it doesn't change the deadweight loss. It just takes away some of the money that this firm might be earning. And in those cases, again, that doesn't solve the problem of the inefficiency. It just essentially takes away some of the money that this monopolist is earning. So we wouldn't want to use taxes. What we typically say is that firms should use, that governments should use price ceilings, either at socially optimal or break even, or they should allow price discrimination, or they could take over the industry. With an artificial monopoly, we kind of rule out the idea of using a price ceiling at the break even because there's not really a need to. What we most often would do is a price ceiling at an optimal, encourage price discrimination or allow them to do it, or break them up and prevent their formation in the first place. So hopefully this helped you understand improving efficiency with monopolies. I'll see you next time.